morning, everyone. Thank you all for turning out to join us on a Sunday morning on this panel, Family Journeys. So, as Nicholas would have said, we have three memoirs here with us today. So, I'll just give a brief introduction, and then I'll ask each of the three panelists to read from their memoirs. So, Ira Mathur is an award-winning Indian-born Trinidadian multimedia journalist. Her memoir, Love the Dark Days by People Tree Press, is the winner of the 2023 OCM Bocas Prize for Nonfiction and was shortlisted for the overall prize. It was also named as among the best biographies of 2022 by the UK Guardian. In 2021, she was longlisted for the Bath Novel Award for her unpublished novel, Touching Dr. Simone. Mathur gained diplomas in creative writing at the University of East Anglia, Guardian, with Gillian Slovo and James Scudamore, and at the Faber Academy with Maggie G. She is currently the Trinidad Guardian's longest-running columnist and has freelanced for the UK Guardian and the BBC. She is the current president of the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago. She has degrees in literature and law and a master's in international journalism. Ira Mathur. Brian Samuel was born in and semi-retired to Grenada while working with the Caribbean Development Bank. He's the author of the memoir, A Song for My Father by Ian Randall Publishers, 2023. Since moving to London with his Windrush generation parents and back to Jamaica, then working for 20 years for the World Bank, he has lived in 10 countries, including many hotspots such as Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe. Round of applause. Simone Dalton is a Trinidadian-born North America-based author, teaching artist, and writing coach. After 12 years as a public relations professional, Simone now writes solely for her love of language. Simone has worked with writers ages 14 to 80 plus in Canada and the United States, and most recently served as an adjunct professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. She is one of the inaugural Black Teaching Fellows of the Boston Creative Arts Center, Grub Street. In 2022, she launched her company, Island Scribe, and will begin hosting Caribbean-based writing retreats for women writers of color worldwide in 2023. Recipient of the 2020 RBC Taylor Emerging Writer Prize for Nonfiction, she holds an MFA from the University of Guelph. Her work is anthologized in Watch Your Head, Black Writers Matter, The Unpublished City, Volume 1, a finalist for the 2018 Toronto Book Awards, and Arc Poetry Magazine's Islands of Influence issue. In 2019, her play Vows was produced by Rare Theatre's Welcome to My Underworld. Simone is working on her first memoir. Okay, so I'm going to ask each of the writers to read, but in the opposite order of which I just read the bios. So Simone, then Brian, then Ira.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and to the Bocas Festival for inviting me to attend this year. This is from my work-in-progress memoir of many, many revisions, and I have called this piece, which was published as a standalone piece, Ban Your Belly. As snow squalls battened down much of North America's east coast, the sky in Toronto remained mostly clear. It had been one of those, quote-unquote, unusually warm winters. December 16th, the 4-day morning hours are remembered for a skiff of snow that dusted the city. I remember that day as the one when my mother died in Trinidad while I slept. Quiet sounds of that hour, heartbeat, breath, wordless yearnings, were disturbed by the shrill of a telephone in my bedroom. A clock radio on my bedside table read 3:15, or maybe it was 3:25 a.m. I did not know what was wrong, but I knew something was not right. Back where Lady of the Night blooms scent the air at that time of day, any phone call received after 9 p.m. starts with an apology. The web of sleep in my eyes dissolved. I lay on my back in bed with the top sheet tucked under my chin, a counterproductive measure considering the lick of sweat on my neck. Dry heat pumped from the baseboard heater in my bedroom. My body hugged the outer edge of the bed as though someone unwanted was beside me. I heard the muffled sounds of my father's voice on the other side of the wall our bedroom shared. He had answered the telephone and was engaged in an inaudible conversation. Maybe it was Granny. At 86, his mother was ready for Father God, even if her family was not. Determined, I squinted at my side of the wall, accented with the color of sage and sequin plumes from an old Caribana headpiece, willing his murbans to unravel their message. We had begun mirroring each other, my father and I. This pattern was in plain view one lazy summer Saturday morning, the eggs and toast eaten chased down with a cup of strong orange pekoe tea. I stood at the kitchen sink, washing the dishes. He approached from the sometimes dining room with a pronouncement. I often thought of C.L.R. James when he was in that mood. Preoccupied with finding a suitable response, I turned to face him and almost missed it. The carbon copying of our bodies, his limbs and gestures moved in chorus with mine. Our identical motions titrated to distill an amalgam of biology and genealogy, of inheritance. The sight put me back to the countless times my mother had said, "Lord, child, you look like your father just now." Just now, the period of time is always slippery. When my mother said it those times, she meant that instant. In the kitchen that Saturday morning with my father, I stopped mid-sentence, finally seeing what she knew all along. Now the phone call meant that he too knew something that I missed. Before long, his mms and mhms sounds lulled me into a dream. The mind can cover great distances, whole geographies when it dreams. Years later, I read that at rest, the likelihood you will experience images, sensations, and ideas, the things that dreams are made of, increases as the brain's activity slows down. Repressed urges, rationalizations, or messages being decoded as they are fired from neuron to neuron during our waking hours. These are some of the best guesses of what makes these sequences possible. Daydreams are different. Daydreams are fleeting moments of escape from our immediate reality. I woke up again, this time with the alarm close to 6:30 a.m. The day ahead was promised to be light. A staff holiday luncheon and gift exchange were planned where I worked. I had been secretly matched with a vice president. Our interactions had been brief since I joined the organization. And when she did speak to me, it was to debate the rules of grammar. So I was eager to present her with my token of a gift of the Maggie bought at a secondhand bookstore. I wanted to challenge her assumptions about me, to prove my worth. I hoped O. Henry's short story would strike the right note. I moved through the main floor of the apartment with stillness, soothed by the hum of morning rituals. The kettle switch flicked on. I grazed against the kitchen window pane like a lizard in hopes of catching the warmth from the early morning sun. Winter had stripped the landscape behind the building, the wall of tall grasses, weeds, and perennial shrubbery. A sound barrier separating us from the commuter train tracks had long succumbed to the freeze and thaw. A thunder of industry passed across the tracks every 20 minutes or so at that hour. The rumble of the boiling water and the Lakeshore East train headed to New Union Station met in a crescendo at 7 a.m. As if on cue, the pipes in the walls of the apartment came alive with my father's ablutions. I grew tense in the kitchen. The solitude of preparing and eating breakfast in the mornings was welcome since he retired a year earlier. He began walking down the padded staircase. Each step sounded as though he was not in a hurry to get where he was going. I, in turn, began running through a checklist of my potential infractions that would cause him to get up that early. There had been many over the past 6 years I had been living with him. A forgotten soiled sanitary napkin in the bathroom, high telephone bills on my course to Trinidad, going grocery shopping. He once bought me a box of cereal I said I was allergic to in an attempt to hide my distaste for freeze-dried strawberries. He called me ungrateful when I asked him for the receipt to return the box to the cereal store. He added this adjective to the list I had been collecting from him over the years. It included selfish and spoiled. He apparently called me A+ shortly after meeting me, but I was a baby then. I was too emotional for him, too quick to cry. He never seemed to have patience with this soft tendency of mine. That morning, I tried to remember if I had forgotten dishes in the sink the night before. Morning greetings exchanged over my shoulder, I turned to face him, thinking small talk would soften the blow. I'm just going to skip to one last little piece. He stood at arm's length distance from me, holding the back of one of the dining table chairs, barefooted and uncharacteristically disheveled. "Mommy died," he said. His tone was low and as though the words remained trapped in his trachea. Sleep lingered on his breath. Drops of water glistened at the edge of his chin. The air grew thick. "Mommy died," he repeated. His words, now suspended between us, lingered looking for me. There was a misfire between what I heard and what I was able to feel. A laugh became a cough, a sign of the breath being snatched from my body, which soon turned my mouth into a question mark. My arms were next. They shot skyward in an awkward plea. Eventually, when no rescue appeared, I rested my clenched fist on my father's chest and fell into him. A wave of grief bigger than my mind had time to process took over my legs. He half scooped, half dragged me across to the couch. The red, green, and gold bag with the gift of the Maggie crumpled beneath us. I curled into his body, just conscious enough to hear the wailing when it started coming up from the deepest part inside of me, a motherless child. Thank you.
That's a tough act to follow, but here goes. This is from a very short chapter called "The Day She Left." The only thing I remember about my mother is the day she left. I was 6 years old, and I remember that day with absolute clarity. I remember snippets of life in Trinidad before then. I remember our 2-story house in Gordon Street, next to our friends, the Ferreiras. I remember Christmas, 1958, when Jerry got a bicycle, which Tommy promptly crashed. Now I can say my brothers are actually called Tom and Jerry. And that's Jerry over there. I remember sitting in my father's lap, steering his big MG Magnet. I remember him lifting me up onto a wildly rocking boat at night, scared witless. I remember us coming across a dead anaconda that some villagers had killed one night, as long as 3 cars in a row. I remember Sundays at Maracas Beach and our dog Simba getting run over by a car and our father throwing him over the ravine on the way home. I remember being scared outside our house on Carnival morning as the devilish jab-jab revelers came dancing down our street, hideously dressed in old rags and cow horns. I remember all these things, except our mother. We have our defense mechanisms, and I guess mine was to forget. I simply do not remember her. I remember snapshots, but she's never in the frame. Where was she? Growing up in Port of Spain was pretty close to boy heaven. We lived on Gordon Street, and the 3 of us boys would roam far and wide, playing with neighborhood kids and getting into trouble. My best friend Brian Ferreira lived next door, and his little sister Gracie was my girlfriend. We'd even swapped chewing gum to seal the deal. And the skinny kid across the road, who we called Skillington. Every day, an old man called Ripe Fig would ride past our house on his rickety old bicycle, with a gaggle of giggling children running after him, shouting, "Ripe Fig, Ripe Fig!" Then he'd slowly dismount, lego a long fart, remount and ride off, leaving a gang of children dying in the street behind him. Between family and friends and school, my memories of Trinidad can be summed up in one word: happiness. It was like the words of the Sparrow Calypso in school days were happy, happy days. And then it all changed overnight. Every afternoon, Dad would pick up Tommy and Jerry from Tranquility Boys School and me from mine, which I don't remember because it was so forgettable. Then we'd drive to Radio Guardian on Maraval Road to pick up our mother, where she had a daily radio show called Neighbor Nelline. Dad would park in front of the building and tap the horn, bap, ba-dap, bap, bap, bap. Pretty soon she'd come bouncing down the stairs, her light tropical dress flowing in the breeze. Or so I imagine. I don't remember. Then we'd all drive home. Except on this day. On this day, she didn't come. After a few more bursts on the horn and still no sign of his wife, Dad went into the building and emerged a short while later, looking puzzled. We drove home in silence. She didn't come home that night, nor the next. A few days later, we were told that Mummy's gone away for a while. A few weeks later, I saw our father packing her clothes, and that was it. She was gone. I was 6, Tommy 9, and Jerry 10, and our mother had just vanished, thrusting the three of us onto the sole care of our ill-prepared father. To say he was ill-prepared was putting it mildly. He was in a state of shock. But despite his shock, there was one thing he knew he would never do: abandon his sons. We never learned where she had gone or why. That wouldn't come until many, many years later. I guess it must have been pretty traumatic to lose your mother at such a young age. But mercifully, I just don't remember. We knew that she was gone, and we wanted her back, but I don't remember crying myself to sleep at night or getting into fights at school because I was some angry kid. Kids gets over stuff. Shrug it off, go outside and play. Strangely enough, my brothers Tommy and Jerry also share this selective amnesia. I would have thought that they would remember more of our mother than me because they were older. They do, but not much more. It's as if she's been airbrushed from our collective history like a Russian dissident. Even though I may not recall being emotionally traumatized by our mother's departure, that doesn't mean I've been immune to her influence. Strangely enough, the older I got, the more she hurt me. A long skeletal arm reaching out for the grave, except that she was very much alive.
Kelly Village, Trinidad, 2000. She has been dead for less than 24 hours. On a hot day when the earth cracked and leaves bristled, Bari Mummy lay inside an open wooden box on the concrete floor of the shed, swaddled from head to foot in 5 separate lengths of white cotton. My grandmother's tiny band of mourners, Noor, Ved, Angel, Winky, and I, stood under the shed watching the grave being dug with a mechanized excavator. I feel Winky's hands heavy on my shoulders. We look at the box, at her face, set as if in yellow marble. Bari Mummy kicked him out of her home into a boarding school when he was a boy, after shooting a rubber band at a maid's breasts. There was a rift for 20 years. She wouldn't forgive him for calling her a Pakistani spy or choosing Mummy over her. But when he unexpectedly turned up at the nursing home, his latest woman sitting in the dark outside in the car, with the engine still running, Bari Mummy seems to have forgotten all that and deftly took ownership of his looks. You're a very good-looking man, well-built, beautiful eyes, a typical Afghan Pathan, the kind imported by the Begums of Bhopal. You've taken after my brothers, who were both well over 6 feet. Really, Bari? He was longing for more. She gave it to him. Really, Winky. With a schoolboy's open vanity, he loved talking about his looks, with a passion only rivaled by his obsession with women and theirs for him. It's a curse, he said, with unmistakable pride every time another woman punctured his tires, flooded his home, and called him till he changed his number. Grandmother and grandson happily spoke of his charms for the next 30 minutes, with Winky demanding to know what his grandfather looked like, whether he, Winky, was taller and who was better looking. Then he overstepped. He never knew when to stop. Was it true that Zafar, his grandfather, liked Parsi women, Jewesses? In what way am I like my grandfather, Zafar? After all, you did name me after him, even though you think I'm a kafir. Bari Mummy's face turned hard. No, you aren't a bloody shit like Noor's father. You don't go around with every whore in town. But that was just what Winky did, and she knew it. But I'm sure he loved your big white legs and round ass. Winky reached for her bottom, fondling its sagging folds. What kind of talk is that, Winky Baba, to your own grandmother? She said, coyness in her crumpled face. He pinched her. She screamed in a mock way, the way she once did with her younger brother. They used filthy language like children in a colonial rose garden a long time ago, as if testing out forbidden words. Behen chot, sister fucker, suar ka bacha, son of a pig, motherfucker. Bari Mummy was more alive in that one short visit of his than she had been in all the hours Angel and I stole away from our lives to sit with her in the dark nursing home. Mummy stands at the foot of the coffin, a still figure around whom a silvery grey sari billows, as if she's posing for an artist. At 60, the childlike appeal of her perpetually startled, almond-shaped eyes give her the look of a brutalized calf, but I know her steely center will hold her. She white like you, the mortician says to Mummy. Beauty daughter, you sure you don't want to touch her face? Mummy sinks, the folds of her saris blooming like Bari Mummy's painted wood roses on the concrete. She holds her mother's unyielding feet, swaddled in white cotton. Maaf karo amma, forgive me. On her knees, her face contorted, she has the hungry, lonely expression of an abandoned child. I crouch by her, holding her, whispering her, remember, Mummy, she blessed you, and support her weight as she slowly stands up. The Maulvi signals that it's time for the janaza, the prayer for the dead. Sadiq joins them. The men assemble, stands shoulder to shoulder, the undertaker, gravediggers, and Maulvi, in a dreamlike sequence, lips moving silently, saying the prayers in Arabic. The men kneel and rise in unison, their faces not registering the discomfort of repeatedly dropping to their knees on the rough floor. Sadiq's dark face is ashen against his white shirt. He defended Bari Mummy as if she was his blood, as if he had more right over her than any of us. At times, he pitted me against her. It was to him and not Winky that she gave her father's gold cigarette holder, embossed with his name and title, Abdul Majid Khan, Nawab of Savanur. The grave is a coagulating wound ringed with red clay, waiting to swallow her up. The excavator runs for a few seconds with the earth flying into the air like chocolate confetti, then cuts off. The gravediggers survey their work. The janaza is over. The family, the Maulvi, the attendants from the funeral home, and the machine operators scatter untidily. The men speak quietly for a moment, then close in on Bari Mummy. A cock crows. She would have liked the attention. She always had more respect for men. She would have fawned over the young visiting imam from Hyderabad speaking in Urdu. Daddy straightens up, hoisting his end. Sweat pours down his jawline and neck. But at 68, he still looks like a vigorous, straight-backed soldier. The Maulvi picks up a clod of clay, crumbles it and throws it in her grave, praying in Arabic. He says the kalma, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. God is one and Muhammad is his prophet. Muttering prayers, the men throw in fistfuls of dirt, one after the other. The grave diggers take over, shoveling blocks of clay, which make big thudding noises. A stiff breeze flattens the long blades of grass in the fields, but I just have to close my eyes to go back. Bari Mummy sits at her piano with pan-stained mulberry lips in her dressing gown, back straight as steel. Angel and I are in our cotton nighties on either side of us. Then she's bent over the keys, swaying in a circular motion, eyes shut, foot poised over the pedals, playing her beloved Symphony No. 9. Her fingers turn feather-light, her low musical voice heavy with an old longing. Somewhere, my love, there will be songs to sing, although the snow covers the hope of spring. Somewhere, a hill blossoms in green and gold, and there are dreams, all that your heart can hold. You'll come to me out of the long ago, warm as the wind, soft as the kiss of snow. Think of me now and then. Godspeed, my love, till you are mine again. Angel and I linger, holding hands, remembering together, looking at the fresh mound before going to our cars.
Thank you all so much for those wonderful readings. The first question I'd like to ask is, well, we all have a story in the Caribbean. Whether we stay where we were born or we move somewhere else or we move to the Caribbean. But I wanted to find out what inspired each of you to put this down on paper. Right? Anyone who wants to go first?
That's not fair. For me, the inspiration, I guess, was one of grief, but I didn't understand how many griefs I would have to go through to get to this point of having this first draft. A couple of years after my mother died in 2010, I said, I need to write this down. I need to figure out how I process what has just happened. And I was just trying to figure out where I was in the world, having left Trinidad in 2004 and then moving to Canada in a sort of having a bit of blinders on, I would say, in sort of a focus to make it, to go to school, to do what so many other Caribbean people do when they go away. But when she died, that sort of pulled me up and made me stop to survey what was around me and where I was actually in, because I was no longer home, and I had to grieve not just her death, but also myself as her daughter and who I was as her daughter and who I was becoming now as a woman. And so I think that was part of the grieving process. And so over the many years of drafting and trying to understand first the story for myself and then how I could share it with others, I have discovered other types of grief, because without my mother being in Trinidad, it meant that Trinidad meant something different to me. When I return home now, I'm not going up to Dundonald Hill to my house where I can hug her up in our bed, and just talk and have stories, but I have to find a new home and a new version of Trinidad. So that was also the bigger grief that also appeared.
We had an unusual upbringing, and it didn't seem unusual to us. I mean, we're just, doesn't everybody live in 6 countries by the time they're 18, 2 of them twice? Isn't that normal? So, through the years, I've been a hoarder. My father was a hoarder of documents and photographs. And about 10 years ago, I started to put together the photographs and scan them for my computer, because they're deteriorating. And then I realized that the children need to know about this. My 5 children and my brother's 4 children, they need to know the story. So I literally put, every picture told a story. So I would say, this is my grandfather, this is where I was born, this is your history. And I would do that and, give it out to the kids, and they're like, yeah, Dad. But, a lot of people said, this story is unusual, and you should really try and write it down. And I also wanted to pay tribute to my father, because my father was a very remarkable man. And when our mother left, he took us on an incredible journey, from Grenada to Trinidad to Guyana to England to America to England to Jamaica, all over the place. And he did it all by himself. He never married again until I was 17. And he consciously decided that after the disappointment of his wife leaving, he would not bring another wife into the family. I presume. I mean, he had occasional partners, but they never lasted too long. It's like they would reach their sell-by date, and he says, right. He and he struggled to bring us up. He was a teacher, and he went to England in 1942 at the depths of the Second World War, and worked in the factories, helped building. He was on the conveyor belt on the factory line building Lancaster bombers. and he stayed in England, married our mother, and went back to Grenada and so on. Don't want to spoil the plot. But, generally, I wrote this book to achieve catharsis. I'm a crier. I'll tell you this from now. I'm going to cry any minute. But my father and our father, he was a remarkable man, and sadly, he died very young. He died at 53 years old in my arms of a sudden heart attack. And if you had asked me that morning, who is the fittest 53-year-old man you know? I said, Dad. He played cricket. He did javelin. He did shot put. He played golf. He was fit as the butcher's dog. And in 5 minutes, not much, 2 minutes, he had gone to play golf. 2 days after Christmas, 1975, we were living in Jamaica. And the funny thing is, he had given me some money, as you do, your kids for Christmas, and I went out and bought an album by the OJs called Family Reunion. And it's a very corny song, like some of the lyrics goes, and then there's the mothers. Well, the mothers are supposed to do the cooking and do the sewing. I said, well, they've clearly not heard of women's lib. And then he said, and there's the sons. Most sons are imitations of their father. So if the father is okay, then the son is going to be all right. And I'm lying on my bed at 6 o'clock in the evening, listening to these lyrics and thinking about my father. And who walks through the door? My father. Because my outside door to the bedroom led to the garage. And I said, how was your golf, Dad? And he said, I got a gas. I said, well, you've been eating the amount of Christmas cake you've been eating. I'm not surprised. He went into his room. 2 minutes later, I heard, Brian! And I come rushing into the room, and he's like this. And I said, what's happening? What's happening? And his last words to me were, it's a heart attack. I'm dying. I love you, son. Goodbye. And he was gone. And, of course, you can see it still affects me. But then we had to find our mother. And, we went, my brother and I went searching for her. We found her in Nassau. We walked up to her in her office, and we said, are you Nellie Darville? And she looked at us, not a hint of recognition. Yes, who are you? Were you married to Jerry Samuel? Yes, what do you want? Who are you? So we just stood there savoring this. And then Tom said, we're Tom and Brian, your sons. So that's why I wrote it. I'd like to say that the reunion with my mother was a happy one. I don't want to spoil the plot.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we all need a moment. Yes. I think when I was living in India, in Bangalore with my mother, it was a very nomadic life. I changed maybe 9 schools until the age of 11 because my father was in the Indian Army. We went from state to state. But when I was living with my grandmother, she was a great storyteller. A frustrated pianist because she was never allowed to complete her education. And what she had was stories. So she was like our Scheherazade. From the Arabian Nights, she actually knew stories of her own family going back to the 16th century. So it's fair to say that while we were 6 or 7 or 8, we were 600 years old, and we were the repository of these stories. That's one reason that I wrote this book. But the other is that after we moved to Trinidad, I got married, I had my children. I remember, we were somewhere, we were in India, and my son actually didn't speak Hindi or Urdu, and he made some warbling noises. And then I realized I'm in one continent, but another continent is falling away from me. And, what am I? And what are my children? But the last, and I think the most compelling reason that I wrote this book is that I think that the dead live with us. I think they're part of us. And I think that we are made up, which I learned very young in life, we are made up not just of ourselves, but like you said, your mother continues to hurt you, your father continues to love you. They're part of the way we think. We see the world through their eyes. And my grandmother was not an easy person to live with. She was like a monkey on my back. And I just felt like she was just the way she hammered the piano. She hammered at me and said, she used to call me Dolly, and she said, tell the truth about me. Just tell the truth. I was not just a terrible creature. There were other bits to me as well. So I think that in the telling of the story, it was all of that, as well as some form of catharsis as well, so that one is able to cull the beauty of one's life and let go the sadness, which is something I think we all do, whether we're writers or not.
Well said, and thank you all of you for sharing. In reading the three pieces, they were quite emotional. You said you wrote to achieve catharsis. Did you? How do you feel now, especially now that it's out in the world and you talk to people about it?
Yeah. Yes, Hello? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it really did what I wanted to. It got it out. And it also got out my anger at my mother, which I didn't even know I had for many, many years. And when the anger, I wanted to, when my father died in 1975, I wanted to connect with my mother. When I connected with my mother, it did not, assuage my grief in any way. In fact, it made it worse. And I carried this for years, all my life, this anger. Where was she? Why did she leave? And the fact that a mother could leave her 3 sons, and if you see pictures of me, Tom, and Jerry at age 6, 7, and 10, we were cute as buttons. And every woman in my life, my wife and my mother-in-law, bless her memory, they were absolutely mystified. How can a mother leave your 3 children and never look back? Never write. I mean, I could understand if she took us with him, because that's what, happens when families break up. But she just went, and we didn't see her, we didn't know her, we knew nothing about her. I remember our dad saying, when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, after she, we'd gone a couple of years, write a letter to your mother. Dear, Mom, I just couldn't do it. What am I going to say to a woman I don't know, who is supposed to be my mother? So, yes, the catharsis was achieved. When my mother died in what year, Jerry? See, I don't even know. When she died in 2003, I was living in Zimbabwe at the time. I was working for the World Bank, and I'd been there a couple of years. We knew she was dying. She lived in Spain. Jerry called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. I knew. Pick up the phone. She's gone, right? Yeah, she's gone. I sat in the living room and cried. And cried my eyes out all night long. Not for her, for the mother I never had. And when Jerry, I went to Spain, we both went to Spain to do the funeral. It wasn't any big, emotional funeral. She was cremated and so on. And when they gave us the ashes, they were warm. Jesus. When we were leaving Spain to fly back to London, I said, Jerry, you take these. And he's like, no, I don't want them. You take them. I don't want them. So I have a picture. It's in the book of Jerry emptying her ashes into the sea. And it was then I could exhale. And it was then I felt her malign influence off my back.
Just ask a question, Paula, do you mind?
Sure, go ahead.
Did you ever try to find out her side of the story and why she actually left? And that could have been a way of humanizing her.
Yes, it was. But of course, I met her 2 months after my father died. So emotionally, I wasn't in a space to think. But she tried to justify her actions. Oh, you don't know what your father was like. Well, I do actually know what my father was like. He was a very warm person. And she left with another man. We were living in Port of Spain. She went to Nassau with some American guy, right? We don't even know. But we did, reconnect with her. Tom and I, when we met her in Nassau, I was flying back to Jamaica and he was flying back to London. But he didn't fly back to London. He stayed in Nassau and lived with her and went to Nassau College and was studying hotel management until she threw him out a year later. So, But yeah, we did. And basically what she said was paint my father in a bad light. And I lived with this for many, many years. This thing, was he, and then I found the letters. Years later, my cousin in Grenada gave me a whole sheaf of old letters that my father had written to my mother after the departure. And that told the whole story. Because my father would write letters on typewriters, and he'd keep a carbon copy. So he had her letter to him and the copy of his reply. So we got the whole story from the horse's mouth. And it was like 20 years after he died, my father was exonerated by these letters. And yes, so that was good that we did reconnect, and I did get the whole story. But again, don't want to spoil the plot.
Yes, the book is wonderful. You should all buy a copy.
2.
Simone?
It's such an interesting question. I think everyone who heard I was writing a book said something similar. You know, it must feel like you reached a catharsis. And I did not feel that at first. I was still, again, trying to figure out the story I was trying to tell. I think what has happened since then is what I feel now that the story has become a lot clearer. What I'm actually able to enjoy is the act of almost self-imagination through telling these stories, through seeing and accepting my mother with all of her beauty and her flaws, and also understanding myself and that she is still within me and lives through me very much so in this book and in this process. But it feels almost otherworldly and bigger than just catharsis. It really feels like a coming home to myself in a way.
The question is about the catharsis.
How does it feel having, you started it for catharsis? Did you achieve it?
I'm not sure that I did it so much for catharsis as I did it to do another duty by my mother and my grandmother, because I just always felt that they, you know, this sounds strange, but in my family, I always felt very invisible. And even as a child, I was a very naughty child. And my mother's way of dealing with me was, in those days, shorten my dresses. My dresses used to come up to here in India every time I was naughty. But I always felt like I was never in the story, because my mother is Muslim, and she's very rooted in Islam of India that goes back many years. And my father is rooted in Hinduism as an army person. But so I felt invisible, and I just felt like a repository, I think. And I think I feel like I've done my duty to my parents. But I think the magic of writing is that you think that you're doing your duty, but because we are journalists, Paula, we just can't lie. You know, so it was unwittingly, I ended up telling my own story. And I think by telling my own story, I convinced myself that I was alive and I was not invisible.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So as you said, Ira, we're journalists, and what I want to ask, moving away from the emotion a little bit, is how did your previous careers, each of you, or your current careers, assist you in writing? You're a journalist. Was it a different writing memoir style? Was there anything in your job, Brian, that assisted you in putting these words to paper? Simone, you've been doing PR for quite a while. What was the switch up like? Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. My career actually hindered my writing. I worked in finance, and I worked with the World Bank, and I wrote memoranda, analysis and reports and reviews of, weighty economic and financial subjects. And then you try and start to write a book. You have to unlearn all that. So every time I wrote the word however, stop it. And so our late brother, Tom, bless him, bastard, he used to call me, I'm joking, he used to call me Brian Samuel, the king of turgid prose. I was, because I wrote it all down and I read it back and yeah, that could go in the World Bank, but it couldn't go in a book. So it took a long time and also to get the emotion out, you don't put emotion in a World Bank document. So it really took a long time and I wrote it. And then when I sent it to Ian, where's Ian? A visionary. When I sent it to Ian Randall, he said, you're lying to yourself. You're not telling the truth. This is like a chronology. Where's the emotion? So I had to go back and, quite a few rum and gingers and late nights and get the emotion out, which was very difficult. And I had to do it quite a few times before I think I kind of got it.
Right. So as a journalist, the one thing I think people sometimes come up to me and say, you're brave and you're so truthful. And I'm a little bewildered by that because I don't know any other way to be. As journalists, we just tell the truth as it is. But actually writing a memoir and doing creative writing is the opposite of journalism. So I think in journalism, if there's a story, dog bites man, it's right in the start. With a memoir and with any form of creative writing, I think that one has to almost follow the rhythm of a human experience and how a human story, so that the heart, the mind, the body, and the actual events unfold differently. And in terms of the craft, it's extremely difficult. And I think, Wordsworth said it's, of his poetry, that it's emotion recalled in tranquility. So if people think that, which I thought when I was younger, you just sit down and say, I hate so-and-so, I love them. That's not writing. You have to be really quiet. You have to go within yourself and you have to catch all those emotions and put them out in a way that is also all about the craft. So it's contained. And Paula, that was a very, very steep learning curve for me. I got some of that at Faber and Faber and Gillian Slovo, but I will say that I also got a lot of that from my People Tree editor, Jacob Ross, and also my publisher, Jeremy Pointing. And he's wonderful because when we had some of our exchanges and we were writing, he would say, Ira, I see you've put in some more decorations. And he would want me to take out the decorations. So it is it's an extremely different thing. But I think in terms of the Derek Walcott, the chapters, it was fairly easy for me because I wrote a diary and I wrote it as a journalist. So I was able to weave in and out of journalism and creative writing like that. Yes.
I think I relate to both of what you've said so far. And I would add that for me, the difficulty was in remembering that my task was as writer and not as editor, because in my former career, the focus there is to edit and have that perfect opening sentence for your press release or your speech. And I would spend hours rewriting the same one sentence and not moving much further on. And that is probably why I'm still here. Working through it, but it also could be quite challenging to work through an entire draft and then come back and edit and be okay with the messy first draft. And I had a difficult time allowing myself that freedom and the ability to be messy on the page. And I think part of that is my training as a public relations professional, and a little bit of it is my upbringing as well. I think we are trained when we go through school, to sit a particular way and stand a particular way and communicate in a particular way. And so I'm meeting that person on the page when I want to be free. And so I have to, it's an ebb and flow constantly.
Thank you. Because I'm also contemplating writing mine, and it's like, Because as Nicholas said, I also moved from country to country. I had a difficult relationship with my family, etc., etc. So, but Ira, you mentioned Walcott, and you have wonderful passages with him in your book. And I must say that when that first conversation you had with him, I was like, that's really good advice. Buy the book. I'm not going to tell you what he said. But what I wanted to find out from each of you, who would you say helped you as mentors in writing these works? And, do you have anything you'd like to say to them?
I'll say mine quickly. My first mentor and very luckily thesis advisor was Dion Brand. And Dion said to me one day walking down the hall from class, because I was very, very nervous being in class with her, and I was, sort of genuflecting for most of the time that I was there for the 2 years. And she turned to me and she said, "Write a Minshell, not a mass." And that is the line that I will continue to work with as I move through these drafts into my final publishing point, because I believe that she saw a glimmer of what I was aiming for, and I hope to find my own version of Minshell in this piece.
Thank you. I think
She said, "Write a Minshell and not a mass."
I know. I probably didn't have a mentor, which is probably why it took so long. But I want to recognize and to say thank you to my wife, Marion, who has been with me this 10-year journey. And, I would always give her bits and show her bits and so on. And she'd say, "Yeah, no, but where's the emotion? Where's the emotion? You're telling a story. It's a chronological thing. Get your emotions out." And she told me, "Tell the truth about your mother. Tell the truth about what she did to you. Don't hide it." Because I would start to write something and she'd say, no, it's reading like a memorandum. So she was the one who, really said, get it out. Get your emotions on paper. Don't hide things. Marion would read something and say, "Look, I can see that there's a whole lot behind what you've written and you're leaving it out because it's too painful." And Marion told me I need to confront my ghosts. And literally, that's what I thought it was. I need to face my fears. I need to get it out. Don't be afraid. Put it on paper. So thank you, Marion.
I had so many mentors that I feel like I'm an imposter. No, this book is not mine. I think one of my first mentors had to be the writer Monique Roffey. I remember she was just literally the freest, wildest creature that I had never met, who was so into the craft. And I remember going to Grand Revere to one of her workshops. And you know how we feel when we're a journalist. We're like, we can write. What's wrong with you? And she was funny. She said she did two things. First of all, she said to us, "Ira, you can't pull a book out of your ass." So after she said that, and I saw the reality of that, she said, "Because you think I'm a journalist, I can write." And then she put us on a little exercise and she sent us out in Grand Revere. She said, "Find something around you, earth, pebble, ocean." She said, "Look at it, smell it, taste it, and then lick it." And then, luckily I had chosen an almond leaf. But so there were all of us on the beach, and the fishermen were looking at this group of strange women licking leaves, licking stones, licking the water, and really, I think I sent her my very early drafts. And I think that because you do have that thing when you're a journalist, you're sloppy, it goes in with some errors. And I think she did teach me that you have to take the craft extremely seriously. Every full stop is important, and what you take out is important. So Monique was there in the very early stages, and I think later on I had very good friends. There was Hadassah. We all started on a small dining table together. I remember Hadassah, Alake, Ayana, who won the Bocas Prize, myself, and Jill Barrow Sullivan. And I think we all sat down, and it was really a painstaking process of really, you have to respect the craft, and it could take you 5 years, it could take you 50. But if they say that law is a jealous mistress, well, I think, writing is like Glenn Close. They want to boil you like a rabbit. So I have to say, Monique has been one of them for sure. And then Amanda Smith, who, in her own gentle way, also helped me along. But along the way, I have to say, afterwards, it's also the readers who helped you to recover from that. And I have to say, well, of course, it's my husband who read many drafts, but there are people in this audience who I feel like I could not have, because I put my whole life here, right? I didn't realize I did it, but apparently I did. So there's Teresa White, and there's Gina Hardy, and Imsha, and my uncle and aunt who are in the audience here, Jaspal and Jasbir Bhogal. So I think it really takes an entire village to create a book, and nobody can say this is my book. A very long-winded answer, sorry.
Such as it is with journalists.
And I can't forget my friend, journalist and guide, Judy Raymond, who I have always looked up to as the idea of the pinnacle of integrity in writing when it comes to craft.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the audience now. There's a mic there. Yes. Yes.
God. You could have asked me at home,
Not directed towards you.
Oh, good.
You see? I was actually going to ask.
Sorry.
Well, we've seen you all three share a huge amount of emotion that has been put into your work, your memoir. Is that it? Or are you a writer? Are you writing beyond that? What are your plans going forward? Two of you have finished books. What happens? What happens next?
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion in the book, but there's even more humor. We had a hilarious upbringing. You could imagine 3 brothers on the streets of London with our father working and selling encyclopedias at night. We were the original latchkey kids. So we got up to endless mischief. And we had a funny upbringing. And every time that our father, you kind of dehumanize your father because you want to bring him down to earth. So we'd make fun, And my stepmother, Joan, she says, you're kind of ridiculing your father. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm making him human. And so, you have to, get things out. But also, like, as I said yesterday or day before yesterday at a workshop, when you're a young fella and you're trying to chat up a girl, what do? You try and make her laugh. You make her laugh, you're half the battle. So, in some parts, I think that the book is quite funny. People have told me so, and I certainly think so. I'm still laughing now. But yeah, you have to bring in emotion, and you have to bring in, facts and figures. So a lot of historical stuff is in there. As to what's happening next, I got the second book ready to go, because this book ends when I'm 22. The next book is called Babylon by Bike, and it's about me, Jerry, and Tom. Sorry, Tom and Jerry, you got to say it right, Tom and Jerry. Riding motorcycles in Jamaica in the 70s. I lived in Jamaica all through the 70s. We've always had motorcycles. You've got about 5. I've got one. We always ride motorcycles. So in Jamaica, during the days of Manly and Marley and reggae and Rasta, I lived in Jamaica. My brothers would come and visit me every summer, and we go all over the place. So that's the second book.
This book for me, when it's when it eventually comes out is I see it as a bit of an opening. So I do have other projects I'm excited to get on to. I think that I will be mining from some of these characters and stories for a very long time, and I'm excited also to bring them to the stage. I had a taste of writing a play, and I'm very excited to get back to that space. So I see that as sort of next to me.
I've got a novel that I wrote during lockdown called Touching Dr. Simone, about a masseuse meeting Nina Simone here in Trinidad and everybody ending up in jail for the night. And thank God my publisher is here. I think he finds me a little relentless. These are the words that. So I've got that. But then last night I was actually speaking to Jeremy, and he said, why don't you also write a book from the point of view of your sister? I mean, given that she is not quite comfortable about this, it would be interesting what she thinks about that, but that's another idea.
Any other questions?
A completely different genre, but would you ever consider writing author fiction?
Absolutely. That's the short answer.
Yeah, I've tried writing my hand at fiction, but that was in days when I was memorandum writing style. It's called Storm. It's about, one of my passions is sailing, so is his as well. And this novel is about the Grenada Revolution and sailing and the confluence of the two. So maybe I'll get that one finished off one day.
Well, like I said, I've got this novel. I hope it finds legs.
Anyone else?
We've wowed them all. They got no questions.
Leela?
Oh, I'm seeing one in the back.
Hi. I know you don't actually hold back normally.
Yes, so this is for Ira. I couldn't help noticing when you read that extract last night, what struck me was, I just came away thinking, this is a novel, but obviously it's presented as a memoir. So my question is really, if you could talk about how you use dialogue and that kind of immediacy of memory in, let me recalibrate that. I think the quality in it that made me think of a novel is that you're so in the present and you have all of this dialogue, right? Which most memoirs that when I think of memoirs, is have this kind of distance, right? So basically, could you talk a little bit about that? And I'm interested, who are your influences in terms of that approach?
In terms of, sorry?
In terms of that approach, that kind of style. Yeah.
Well, I've been an avid reader all my life, and I think I love the novel, and I realized very quickly that when I started writing the memoir that I couldn't say, and then this happened, and then that happened, and I started learning actually how in creative writing, how novelists work, how it works with short stories. And unlike journalism, where, as Virginia Woolf put it, it's a mere tossing of omelets, I think you throw everything down on the page, the memory and everything that goes with it. So there's a gush of emotion. So you keep it as authentic as possible. Then you look at that splodge in front of you. It's like a cake that is, that is not baked. It's got all bits of pieces. It's all over the place. And then you carefully pick it out. And then you start to use the craft. And that is where I get the whole respect of creative writing. Some people say it can't be taught, but I think that if you read enough, you get a very, very clear idea. If you want to go very spare, you go with somebody like Hemingway. If you like, a more kind of lush writing, you go with maybe somebody like, well, I wouldn't say Naipaul, but I'd say you'd go with somebody like Walcott, who's lyrical. But the whole thing I found about writing is that it demands crystal clear clarity. So, and it's all about, when I was a journalist, television journalist, I remember I did documentaries, and I remember that every scene that you write needs to create an image in somebody's head. So there's so many little bits of the craft that you bring together after you throw everything down on paper. So I would say it's rewriting and rewriting. I know Leonard Cohen, whose music I love, when he wrote poetry, he wrote one poem 100 times and by hand. So it's all about the rewriting and the editing, I think. I hope that answers the question.
My wife used to call it edit, 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 edit. You're like, stop editing. Right? But you have to. Because I would write something and 6 months later look back and say, this is crap. You know, so it's like cooking. You have to practice and practice and practice.
Simone?
I don't think I could add anything more to that. I think that's exactly what I would say.
Go ahead.
Yes, can I, as you were speaking, Ira, I remembered I was chair of the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, and you ran some sessions for my team, so they'll be able to write articles for Catholic News. And I'm listening to the three of you, and I've been to 2 other sessions, and I'm wondering, at a time when I first came back from England to live in Trinidad, I remember, but Trinis don't read. So I think there's a kind of duty for writers, for people like you, to give back to society, to try to encourage, to be educators to our students at all levels, because I was speaking to some university lecturers, and we have a problem at university level in terms of students having come through the system and were failed, because many of them have problems with writing, spelling, etc. So do you see yourself, my question is, do you see yourself as an educator, as somebody to pass on the craft to those who are coming up behind you?
Absolutely, Leela. I feel like we have to, I think that without reading is what civilizes us. Reading is what creates societies, and it bigs up the world. And I never knew this so much as when I went into the prisons a year before lockdown, and I asked to sit with condemned men. And people were like, are you crazy? They've all kind of killed people with their hands. And when I sat there, I realized that all these men were readers. Some of them had been in prison for 20 years and for the most horrific crimes. And sitting there and seeing their hungry faces for news of the outside world and for the landscape within, for their own interiority, they were hungry not so much for the internet, not so much for what we have here, but for books. So I sat there and I talked to them about books, and through books, people like them, and in a sense that when, Paula Lucy Smith is here, and she's done amazing work in literacy in all these years, and I have met people who they're dying to get words out, but when you don't have the tools, it's like everything gets choked up. And I think the most important thing that we can do is encourage people to read, because I think a more reading country and more reading world leads to our understanding of our own humanity and others.
I'll just add that I think what Bocas has achieved is going to show itself in generations that are not yet here. I'm so thrilled that this festival exists, and I wish I had had this festival when I was in school, going through primary school and secondary school here. I could have only imagined what could have been different, but then, you have to go through life that you do. In terms of the reading and the encouragement of reading in schools, I would say that we also need to look at what is on the curriculum. I think I heard last night at the award ceremony that challenge that was put to the Bocas team, and I'm hoping that we see a reflection of that in school curriculums coming up very shortly. Because I don't believe that we don't want to read or that we are not reading. I think we may not have, in some cases, the right books in front of us, and in some cases, not the right structures to encourage that reading to happen more and more. But I think we are on the right path to making that happen.
Hi. I've been reading a lot of history these days, and a lot is being written about the unreliability of memory. And I was wondering what you think about that in terms of genres like autobiography and memoirs, and how do you deal with that?
You know, memory is, when you get to my age, memory gets very shaky. And it's funny, when I was writing this book, I would tell Jerry a story. I said, Jerry, you remember this? And he goes, no. Then he would tell me a story. You remember this? No. But so we'd bounce off each other. Or we would see the same incident, we would remember the same incident in slightly different ways. So yes, memory does fail. But fortunately, in my case, I had documents. My father was a hoarder. And he kept photographs and diaries. He used to write for the BBC in Guyana in 1955, and he kept diaries and he kept all his thoughts. When we moved to America in 1966, 67, which is a very volatile time in American history. It was just around the end of I nearly said apartheid, segregation. And he was at the race riots of Chicago, Cicero in 1966, and he wrote all this stuff down. So fortunately, I had a treasure trove of material from him, including old photographs from the 50s and documents and so on. So I was assisted in my failing memory by my father's almost anal retentive, the way he kept everything and wrote everything down. It's like he knew that somewhere, sometime, somebody was going to go through all this and write it down. So, thanks, Dad.
So very quickly, I'll say that I think memory is extremely subjective. It is almost like it belongs to the nature of dreams. And once we use that caveat, as Jeremy had encouraged me to do, and actually, help write that bit, that memory is not. It's not like concrete. It's not journalism. It's what we feel within us and how we change. So, I think a really important part of memory is what you said earlier, which is you felt the pain of your mother even more after she died. So actually, people, just like people say, history is not what happened, but what people think happened. So if you've had that hurt and it's sedimented in you, everybody has an absolute right to feel the way they do, but without claiming that it's absolute fact.
Thank you. Anyone with another question? We have a few more minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, I had one question I wanted to ask, but if the majority vote, there's a question.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you to people like Debbie Jacob and Suzette Cadiz. Suzette Cadiz heads Let's Read, and she collects books that people give her that they own, and then she redistributes to a lot of people. I have gotten books from her to go carry to schools, and I think this is what we need to get the children in our nation reading. So I urge you that if you have books to give away, contact Let's Read, and Suzette does a marvelous job. Thank you.
Great. So my question was going to be, in your traveling as a migrant myself, I just want to hear a little bit about the differences in cultures. Well, we know Brian could talk all evening. Because for me, coming from Jamaica, which is majority Black, to Trinidad and Tobago, which is, almost evenly split between Black and Indian, there's a little bit of a culture shock there. So, if you could just give us a couple minutes on, what it was like experiencing that. And then, yes, we will have a short reading from each person.
Well, I'm going to make this really quick. I thought we'd come to America, but we'd come to Tobago, right? I was looking for the Hoover. I thought that, to me, that was America. But I think one of the big culture shocks for my parents, it's a very quick, funny story. They were invited out one evening for dinner in Tobago when we'd just come from India. And then my mother and father came home looking extremely flustered. And we were like, what happened? They said, darling, we were invited out to dinner, and as soon as they opened the door, they said, good night. And Daddy said, good night. And he turned around and we came home. It was only 6 p.m. We were not welcome. So that's mine. So
Maybe I just dropped in. Yeah, living in 10 countries, you certainly get to experience different cultures. And just a quick one. When we went to America in 1966, we went to the White House and met President Lyndon Johnson because my father was an exchange teacher and there was a big thing. So when we went to, he had a job teaching at La Grange, a small town in Illinois, 1966. And he was a teacher. So he was the English teacher who was coming to town on this exchange program. And in this little one-horse town, nothing happens. You know, it's like Deadsville. So all of a sudden, the English teacher is coming. And he was announced beforehand. So, you know, when we got to La Grange, the phone would ring, and it's the head of the PTA, it's the deputy mayor, it's all the great and the good of this little one-horse town wanted a piece of the English teacher. And when you talk to my father on the phone, I wouldn't say he had an affected British accent, but he spoke properly. So when they call him on the phone, hello, this is the English teacher. Would you like to come around for dinner? Yes, of course, we'll be there at 6 o'clock. And then as we walk up to the door, Dad, me, Tom, and Jerry, Dad would say, boys, watch this. Knock on the door. Hello, the English, huh? Like not what they expected. But are you English? And in La Grange, you know, it was a segregated town, but we weren't supposed to be black. We were supposed to be English. So we did not fit any categorization. And just another quick one. When I grew up in England, I was a black kid. I may not be actually black by some measures, but, you know, as a Windrush kid, I'm a black kid. And I got into fights all the time, being called chocolate face, wog, nig-nog, whatever. Then in 1971, age 18, I moved to Jamaica. And the first day in Jamaica, I'm walking down the street, a little beggar says, hey, white boy, give me $1. So all of a sudden, I went from being a downtrodden black immigrant kid to being a white boy oppressor in Jamaica. So
Wonderful. Okay, great. So we'll have a reading, short reading, because we've just been told we have 5 minutes from each person. And then remember, you can always talk to them afterwards. Any questions you didn't want to ask in public, they'll be here most of the day.
This piece is called Nostalgia. A single broken front step was confirmation that life as I knew it had irreparably changed. Its concrete was cracked into, gouged out. As I rolled the house keys around in my hand, I stood at the front door studying the evidence which remained. The steps, insides of fine gray silt and pebbles, spilled out onto the landing below. Perhaps someone had tried to sweep the mess into a mound, but a breeze or animal had carried the trail of powdery residue to the door. It was a necessary measure taken by the police. They were summoned by the paramedics, whose protocol did not permit them to break into the locked homes of the people who had called for help. At the house, the first responders found a wrought iron gate with a large link chain padlock behind the gates to the front door with a deadbolt lock. No one except my mother had the keys. The door and gate yawned in opposite directions, with the latter's span cut short by the step. What was left was a gap to negotiate. There was room for only one person at a time to pass through. On that early morning, there would not have been enough room for 3 or 4 people it probably took to get my mother's 200-pound plus body out on a gurney. A rustling near the roots of the sour cherry tree brought me back to the keys, the door, the house, the reason I was there. Going to the last place she was alive seemed logical. The noise, likely that of an iguana in search of the sweet, tangy pulp of the tree's cherries, reminded me of how I had accidentally planted the tree as a child. Situated at the back of the house, the mother tree was constantly laden with the vitamin C-rich fruit. 3 was a magic number to ensure full potency. My mother had heard from an unknown source. It was then our practice to pick and eat 3 cherries before we left the house. We would devour the tiny red powerhouses and toss the sucked dry wing seeds at the front of the house. The offspring soon took root, grew tall, and spread its branches wide, though its fruit was never as sweet or plump as the source. And while the second tree outlived the first, it stopped bearing fruit long before the iguana came looking. It appeared the iguana and I shared a longing for that which no longer existed in the place we left it last. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Of his 3 sons, I undoubtedly had the closest relationship with our father, certainly the longest. I don't know if I was his favorite, but he certainly was mine. He summed it up himself in a letter. Quote, "All 3 of my boys have been emotionally scarred by the departure of their mother. Jerry, the eldest, has become distant and aloof from me. Tommy, the middle boy, is headstrong and rebellious, while Brian, the youngest, clings to me overmuch. Never a truer word spoken. I vividly remember clinging to my father, cuddling up to him in bed, squeezing myself under his armpit. For weeks after he died, I'd go into his wardrobe and bury my face in his clothes, breathing in his essence. Forgive the overworked cliche, but he was truly my father who mothered me. Tom used to tell me, I softened up Dad for you so you could walk all over him, you bloody ingrate. But he's right. Dad blunted himself on the rock of Tom, and by the time I entered my rebellious stage, tame by comparison, Dad didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Or maybe he'd learned a better way. The first time Tom stayed out all night, Dad went mad. The first time I stayed out all night, he said I should have called. This mellow approach clearly worked better than confrontation. After we moved to Jamaica, and particularly after he stopped teaching, it was as if our father exhaled, finally. George Harrison said, with every mistake, we must surely be learning. If that is true, what about us? Did my brothers and I learn from our father, warts and all? Did we grow? Are we better than him? Far be it from me to answer such weighty questions, except to say that of course we learned that from our father. How could we not, from the man who single-handedly raised us? I continually find myself doing a dad, recycling his phrases, telling his corny jokes, reliving his frustrations, and every time I do so, I smile. People die, but their spirit lives on. The essence of my father is still here, embodied in us, his children, and his children's children. At this rate, it will take a long time for the spirit of Darwin Fitzgerald, Jerry Samuel, to fade away.
I had been threading my way through the Carnival Sunday crowd across the Queen's Park Savannah at dusk, its chaotic din made worse by dust kicked up by the crowds pounding the earth in time to the music and trucks carrying the steel pans from the competition stands back to the panyards. The traffic fumes mingled with the perfume from the cannonball tree, a vine with rosebud-shaped flowers, throwing out the combined scents of lilies, lang-lang, freesia, jasmines. So extravagant, it could have emanated from a Maharaja's wedding chamber. I nearly tripped and fell over the roots of the cannonball tree, spreading out beneath the cracked pavement, when a large, veiny man's hand firmly grasped my arm. It was Derek Walcott. If you're not red, you're dead, as they say on these islands, meaning that men like him outstrip all other men in appeal, in imagined sexual prowess. Men like him with that mix of European and African blood have the reputation of getting any woman they want. A moment with him had been enough to confirm this. He was all charge, all force, deep voice, well-built, skin like molasses in milk. I thought of his poem, The Schooner's Flight, where his poetic alter ego, Shabin, claimed it all. I have Dutch, nigger, and English in me, and either I'm nobody or I'm a nation. Derek Walcott? My question didn't warrant an answer. Who are you? He asked. That is, apart from someone who's not looking where she's going. Freelance journalist, the Trinidad Guardian. Congratulations on the Nobel. I once wrote for that paper, he said. I knew that, as did V.S. Naipaul, as did Naipaul's father. Where are you from? Tobago. He laughed. With that accent, what is it? Continental, Indian English? Across the road, two ghostly shapes among the magnificent 7 colonial mansions stood sentry over the savannah, which some call the most giant roundabout in the world. Whitehall with coral stone from Barbados, built in the style of a Venetian palazzo by a cocoa planter in 1904, and home to the Prime Minister's office, and next to it, Stolmeyer's Castle, with its turrets modeled on Balmoral Castle. He was waiting to hear what I would say next. I'm doing freelance work covering the steel band competition in the savannah for the Government Information Unit. He pounced quicker than light with a question. Information expert. Well then, can you multiply 25,435 by 234? He'd laughed uproariously and disappeared into the dust. A full 24 years ago, this vanishing left me unsettled, longing to hold on to that vast ebullience bubbling from his Himalayan brain, erupting into its full laugh, so much like my grandmother's, it gave me a jolt.
Okay, and that ends our panel for today. Thank you all for coming.